here we go, ladies and gentlemen. What some, in fact what many consider to be one of the first great important releases of the summer of 2016. It's Magma by Gojira, and it's been a while since we've last talked about these guys, since L'Enfant Sauvage, which was a number of years back. So Gojira was able to give us a couple of tracks prior to this album's release, including Stranded and The Shooting Star, just the name too. And it was something that caused a little bit of concern, but a little bit of excitement. It seemed like this band that has a very large and wide fan base was doing something a little bit different with their sounds. They opted to simplify things a little bit further than what they'd already done in order to craft something that was a bit different. And the band themselves have even confessed as to saying that they went in and recorded this album with a bit of a different philosophy and a different real idea in mind, saying that some of the riffs are sort of similar to some Pantera tracks, which I don't fully agree with, but I can see sort of what they were going with that. They were speaking with that whole direct philosophy in mind whenever making that statement, and considering some of the riffs have a sort of basic power or basic prowess to it, it does have some of that cornerstone rhythm that you may, find in some Pantera from the 1990s. The only difference between the two is that, of course, Pantera had the enlisted duties of Dimebag Darrell to throw in a ridiculous solo every now and again in order to give those songs added punch. But what would Gojira be able to do? What can they bring to the table in order to bring that punch? Let's find out. So The Shooting Star and Severa are both songs that were available prior to this album's release. This constitutes right around the first 10 minutes of this album. And really the first half of Magma is the shorter of the two, with the album really expanding a lot more in its second half. But these two tracks definitely deliver in some way or shape. The Shooting Star is a track that I feel has a real strong presence to it, and it's one that kind of grips your attention all the way until its conclusion. And really, whenever this song ends, you are kind of shocked by it. It doesn't necessarily come out of nowhere, but it's not one that announces itself in a very pronounced fashion. And that's something that gives it a little bit of additional charm. It almost makes the two tracks feel a bit connected in a way, even though they're not. Going into The Cell and then into Stranded being the first track that we got off of this disc from the band, Stranded still really maintains itself as a strong single, at least in my estimation, because sometimes less is more, and in this track, that less is more philosophy actually works advantageously for this band, considering they're able to deliver a very powerful track without too much motion, without too much kinesis, and it's one that kind of stays in that real familiar ground until the end point, until the last minute of this track, and it really delivers something that has a lot of punch to it. I can see that being played at shows, and there being a lot of excitement being, surrounding it, so that's definitely a positive for this group. Yellowstone ends the first half. It's a 1 minute and 19-second instrumental that leads into the title track, Magma, which is the longest cut on this album and definitely one of the best. I always have really enjoyed whenever Gojira has the ability to, go a little bit further and go a little bit more dense. And I feel like even though they have opted to go with a bit of a more simple overall construction on this album, that Magma is able to fill that 7 minutes with a real good philosophy. Not to mention, it opens up this track in a way that really doesn't happen on too many of the others. So that expansiveness definitely gathers it a little bit of momentum going into Prey and Only Pain. Now, Prey is one that I think is a little weaker than Magma, but still has a fairly decent charm to it, whereas Only Pain almost feels like it's a more, aggro cut that's going to lead into Lowlands, which is a very interesting ninth cut, which gives a lot of power and passion once again, but is able to also use the pace to its advantage. And so there's all 3 P's right there: power, pace, and passion, that craft a cut that really could have been fit better, perhaps as the final thing that we heard from this disc, the last grasp that we heard out of Magma, perhaps the final explosion from the volcano. Liberation is kind of interesting as a final choice. It's one that's very soft. It's largely, in fact, it's completely instrumental. It's one that just doesn't feel perhaps like it belongs. Now, there have been a lot of albums in the past that have ended on instrumentals, that have ended on shorter cuts, that really just set the feel as a bit of a finale for a large-scale experience, but Liberation feels a little bit out of place. I dig the fact that they opted to go with something with a little bit of a softer register to close this out, but at the same time, I feel like this was a real critical moment for Magma to leave a real lasting impression, and I don't think that it did that as well as it potentially could have. It's one that kind of feels like it leaves a little bit of lacking. It leaves a little bit of question, and it opens up for a lot more debate and a lot more, perhaps, what the fuck was that, as opposed to really the inflection of that same sentence being different is, what the fuck was that? Notice how those two statements, when stated different ways, have a completely different meaning, and this is one that's more the former than the latter. Overall, this album is just kind of strange. This is a disc where Gojira opted to take a chance, to really take a leap of faith, and I'm not sure how well this this real leap has kind of helped them out in the long run. This is something that definitely feels like it was constructed with a great purpose in mind, but perhaps the Gojira is just not a band that kind of harbors this pacing the best of ways. It's perhaps one that may have been better off utilized by bands such as the Baroness, for example. I still really like this album, though. It's one of those seductive discs that the more you listen to it, the more you kind of dig it, and the more that it doesn't feel quite as off-putting. It feels a little bit more natural, and I think that that's what this album is going to end up being for a lot of Gojira fans. It's going to come off as a grower disc, and those who are willing to actually take the journey multiple times and sort of take the time in order to let it speak to them will have a lot better understanding, and not to mention a much firmer appreciation for this disc than somebody that opts to listen to it once and just kind of decide not to take the journey again. So with that being said, how do we really score this? We had an album earlier this year that was a grower that, after a couple of listens, became good, and then kind of trailed off with future and subsequent listens in The Astonishing by Dream Theater. It's one whose score was exceptional, but has done nothing but trail off ever since. Yeah, it was like a 90 out of 100 whenever it was reviewed. If I were to re-review it right now, I'd probably only put it at about an 84 or 85. We don't want to make that same mistake twice. But with Magma, I think it's still an 84 or an 85 album out of 100. This is not one that really compares as, prominently to their elder work as some of their more recent, including the aforementioned L'Enfant Sauvage, which was very good in my opinion. But I think this is an album that has the potential to maybe go up as opposed to down. I think it has that charm where further listens is going to really benefit it very well, and it's an album that you feel a little bit naturally drawn to after its conclusion. You kind of want to seek out and search this album for things that perhaps you may have missed, considering it's a bit of a paradox. But I want to know what you guys think about Magma by Gojira. Let me know in the comments below. I'm coverkillernation. This is just the first of a couple of really big releases that we're going to be tackling this weekend. We have the brand new Swans album, which will be coming either later tonight, which is Thursday, or tomorrow, which is Friday. If it happens to be on Friday, then it will be coupled with the brand new Red Hot Chili Peppers album, which I'm sure has everybody just leaping out of their chairs. But hey, I like the Peppers. Fuck you. I saw them live. One of the best shows I've ever seen. So fuck you twice. So if this is something that you dig, if you like this album, if you like this review, if you like this video, if you think my face is pretty, if you're a Pens fan, hit that damn subscribe button right now, and I will talk to each and every one of you guys next time when we talk about The Glowing Man by Swans. So stay tuned.